Finally, let's talk about managing infrastructure. Azure Stack Hub includes infrastructure monitoring capabilities that help you view health and alerts for an Azure Stack Hub region. The region management tile lists all the deployed regions of Azure Stack Hub. It's pinned by default in the administrator portal for the default provider subscription. The tile shows the number of active critical and warning alerts for each region. The tile is the entry point into health and alert functionality of the Azure Stack Hub. The health resource provider manages health and alerts. Azure Stack Hub infrastructure components register with the health resource provider during an Azure Stack Hub deployment and configuration. This registration enables the display of health and alerts for each component. Health in Azure Stack Hub is a simple concept. If alerts for a registered instance or a component exist, the health state of that component reflects the worst active alert severity, warning, or critical. Warning means an operator can address the warning alert in a scheduled manner. The alert typically doesn't impact user workloads. Critical means an operator should address the critical alert with urgency. These alerts indicate issues that are currently impactful or will soon impact Azure Stack Hub users. In addition to using the Azure Stack admin portal, you can also view health state of components through REST API and PowerShell. The View API action displays the REST API that was used to generate the list view. This action provides a quick way to become familiar with the REST API syntax that you can use to query alerts. You can use this API in automation or for integration with your existing data center monitoring, reporting, or ticketing solutions. Azure Stack Hub has an integrated syslog client that, once configured, emits syslog messages with a payload in Common Event Format, or CEF. The display diagram describes the integration of Azure Stack Hub with an external SIEM, or Security Incident and Event Management System. There are two integration patterns that need to be considered. The first one, the one in blue, is the Azure Stack Hub infrastructure that encompasses the infrastructure virtual machines and the Hyper-V nodes. All the audits, security logs, and alerts from those components are centrally collected and exposed via syslog with the CEF payload. The second integration pattern is the one depicted in orange and covers the baseboard management controllers, or BMCs, the hardware lifecycle host, or HLH, the virtual machines, and the virtual appliances that run the hardware partner monitoring and management software, and finally the top of the rack, or TOR switches. Note that these components are hardware partners specific to the hardware partner. The Azure Stack Hub Health and Monitoring System monitors the status of the storage subsystem and raises alerts as needed. The Health and Monitoring System can also raise alerts for the following: non-hot swappable items such as CPU, memory, motherboard, baseboard, management controller, disk controller, host bus adapter, network adapter, operating system disk, or data drives. This flow diagram shows the general process to replace hardware components that are non-hot swappable. Actual replacement steps will vary based on the OEM or original equipment manufacturer hardware vendor. This is another good place to pause the video to review the various configuration possibilities. The following steps provide a high-level overview of the component replacement process. Don't follow these steps without first referring to your OEM-provided FRU or field replacement unit documentation. First, use the shutdown action to gracefully shut down the scale unit node. This action may not be required based on the physical condition of the hardware. 2, in an unlikely case the shutdown action does fail, use the drain action to put the scale unit into a maintenance mode. This action may not be required, again, based on the physical condition of the hardware. 3, after the scale unit node is in maintenance mode, use the power off action. This action, again, may not be required based on the physical condition of the hardware. 4, replace the damaged hardware component. Whether your OEM hardware vendor does the component replacement could vary based on your support contract. 5. Update the firmware. Follow your vendor-specific firmware update process using the hardware lifecycle host to make sure the replaced hardware component has the approved firmware level applied. Whether your OEM hardware vendor does this step could vary based upon your support contract. Use the repair action to bring the scale unit node back into the scale unit. Use the privileged endpoint to check the status of a virtual disk repair. With new data drives, a full storage repair can take multiple hours depending on the system load and consumed space. After the repair action is finished, validate that all active alerts have been automatically closed. On the same hyperlink, it may be worth reviewing how to replace a disk for Azure Stack Hub and replace a scale unit node, or just bingle it. You can share diagnostic logs created by Azure Stack Hub. These logs are created by the Windows components and on-premises Azure services. Microsoft support can then use the logs to fix or identify issues with an Azure Stack Hub instance. To get started with Azure Stack Hub Diagnostic Log Collection, you have to register your instance. If you haven't registered Azure Stack Hub, again, you'll need to use the Privileged Endpoint or PEP to share the logs. Make sure you review this link. Not only does it detail out all the various PowerShell commands to configure syslog, but they are broken down by the methods to show with these configurations that are shown in the graphic. This is another good place to pause the video to review the configuration options for syslog integration. Site recovery contributes to your business continuity and disaster recovery strategy, or BCDR. The service ensures that your VM workloads remain available when expected and unexpected outages occur. Site recovery will orchestrate and manage replication of VMs to Azure storage. When an outage occurs in the primary site, Azure Site Recovery can fail over to Azure. Make sure to review these 7 steps. With these steps complete, you can then run a full failover to Azure as and when you need to. On failover, Azure VMs are created from the stored VM data, and users can continue accessing workloads running on those Azure VMs. When everything's up and running again, you can fail back Azure VMs to your primary site and start replicating to Azure storage again. The failback process involves several manual steps. First, stop the VM running in Azure. Second, download the VHDs. Third, upload the VHDs to Azure Stack Hub. 4, recreate the virtual machines. And finally, start the VM running on Azure Stack Hub. Follow these best practices when you deploy and manage Azure Stack Hub to help mitigate data loss if there's a catastrophic failure. Enable infrastructure backup after deployment of each Azure Stack Hub cloud. Using Azure Stack Hub PowerShell, you can schedule backups from any client server with access to the Operator Management API endpoint. The UNC string for the path must use a fully qualified domain name, or FQDN. IP address can be used if internal name resolution isn't possible. A UNC string specifies the location of resources such as shared files or devices. And the encryption certificate is used to encrypt backup data that gets exported to external storage. The certificate can be a self-signed certificate since the certificate is only used to transport keys. The key must be stored in a secure location. For example, Global Azure Key Vault certificate. The CER format of the certificate is used to encrypt the data. The PFX format must be used during cloud recovery deployment of Azure Stack Hub to decrypt backup data. Make sure to also review the operational best practices on the backup link at the bottom of the slide. You want to type the path by using a UNC string for the path to a file share hosted on a separate device to configure the backup storage location. For the location, you can alternatively use an IP address. To ensure availability of the backup data after a disaster, the device should be in a separate location. Azure Stack Hub has a public infrastructure network using externally accessible public IP addresses assigned to a small set of Azure Stack Hub services and possibly tenant VMs. PKI certificates with the appropriate DNS names for these Azure Stack Hub public infrastructure endpoints are required during Azure Stack Hub deployment. In the PKI link at the bottom, make sure to review certificate requirements such as an internal or public certificate authority is required, or that the format must be PFX. Review the mandatory certificate requirements such as a SAN certificate can be used for dev, but for a production environment, there should be a certificate for each endpoint. Likewise, review the optional PAS certificates requirements, such as which ones require SAN certificates and which ones must have a separate certificate per endpoint. The retention period in days determines how many days of backups are preserved on the external location. The default value is 7. Scheduler supports a maximum of 14 and a minimum of 2 days. Backups older than the retention period are automatically deleted from the external location. In encryption settings, provide a certificate in the certificate.cer file box. Backup files are encrypted using this public key in the certificate. Provide a certificate that only contains the public key portion when you configure backup settings. Once you set the certificate for the first time or rotate the certificate in the future, you can only view the thumbprint of the certificate. You can't download or view the uploaded certificate file. To create the certificate file, run the following PowerShell command to create a self-signed certificate with the public and private keys and export a certificate with only the public key portion. You can save the certificate anywhere that can be accessed from the admin portal.